Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This is episode number 61 of the podcast, so we're getting up there on those numbers, man. This week I have 5 new LitRPGs reviews for you, including Headshot, One in the Gut. After that, I'll be reviewing Luckless, an MMORPG and LitRPG online adventure, The Second Age of Retha book. Long title. After that, it'll be the Nagant Wars, The Pawn Sacrifice. Then after that, it will be Blade Judgement, Everjail, Episode 1. And then after that, it will be Vengeance over Vanaheim, the third book in the Valhalla online series. But of course, we're going to begin with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we'll begin with Alarong Kong, author of the Chaos Seed series, has recently released some very cool bonus art that depicts the very first meeting between Richter and Scion. So it's kind of cool. I think it's very pretty, and the detail work is very nicely done. So very nice to look at. Additionally, Alarong has released the very first chapter of the next book in his Chaos Seed series. It's on his Patreon page for anybody to read and view. His Patreon supporters get the first 3 or 4 chapters, I think, right now. But, they pay even to support him as a writer. So, but if you're interested in reading that first chapter, it's there. We'll have a link in the show notes for his actual Patreon page. So there you go. Now, on to new audiobooks. That's actually all the LitRPG news we had. In audiobooks, we have 2 new releases, or actually a couple new releases, I should say. The first in new audiobooks is going to be Warscapia, written by Garrett Boggs, narrated by Matthew something. I can't read that in the text. Either way, Warscapia is a fun, really humorous LitRPG story, and I think the cover for the audiobook is even more adorable. So there you go. Also in new audiobook releases is Player in the Greenwood, written by Galen Wolfe, narrated by Kevin The Well. Also, Ascend Online is finally out as an audiobook, book 1, written by, friend of the podcast show, Luke Chimlenko, performed or narrated by Luke Daniels. So a bunch of Lukes involved in that one. One of my favorite LitRPG series. The cover for the audiobook to me looks a little weird, but it's a fun story, and I hope that you enjoy the audiobook as well. Also, last but not least, we have Harming Cooper's Fantasy Online Hyperborea. It's actually narrated by, again, friend of the podcast, Jeff Hayes, who's been on the show for an author narrator interview. He always does good work. So there you go. Now, on to stories that have been released this week, but I haven't had a chance to review them. But I want to make sure to let you know that they are out there in the world on Amazon. This includes The Eternal Transcend. This is book 3 in the world of Gaim. Kingdom Heart level 3 is out. The Long Road to Karn, which is the 5th book in the Realm of Archon series, is out. And Necromancers, Demons, and Kings, the 2nd book in the World of Samar series, is also out. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. This is just a quick rundown of all the stuff that I know about that's coming out in July and August. It's just a list that I'm reading. You can skip it if you like. Beginning with July the 21st, The First Planet, The Space Masters, Book 1. On the 28th, Stratus Online, Awakening. The 31st of July, The Slave in the Locked Lands, Weirdest New Book 2. On August the 1st, it'll be Office Wars, Bathroom Politics. That's the 2nd book in that series. Also on August the 1st, Rapid Play. Then also on August 1st, Into the Black, Book 3. On the 4th of August, The Glitch Fiends, Part 2, Hell's Glitch Book 3. That title always confuses me. On August the 15th, it'll be Pharaoh Book 4. Also on the 15th of August, it'll be The Last War of Ungaia. On the 18th of August, Corium, The Shadow Legacy 2. On the 20th of August, The Shaman's Revenge. 22nd of August, Shards of Reality. 31st of August, Supermassive Overload, The Space Masters, Book 2. So there you go. On to new releases and reviews. Okay, in new releases and reviews, we have, again, 5 nice reviews. Some of these are great, some of these are okay. We're going to be with Headshot, One in the Gut, Book 1 of the Zombie LitRPG Trilogy. This is written by Matthew Sieg, It is 356 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kingdom Unlimited. I'm going to read to you my description of the story. It's slightly shorter than the author's. Headshot uses some advanced system that plays the game directly in your mind, using your memories to recreate the details of the game world. The game creates a simulated environment of the world and drops you into it either as a zombie or as a human survivor. Each session of the game lasts 7 days, ending on Saturday at midnight. If you die in the game, you're kicked out for the rest of the week. Ryan, our main character, is not rich. He plays as a zombie with the goal of surviving till the end of the week when the servers are reset and a new round in the game world begins. Now, playing as a zombie in this game world is free to play. So there's lots of zombies. I mean, literally most of the people in the world are zombies. If you're a human survivor, you have to pay $20,000 a year. Plus, you can spend more money in the in-game store for whatever you want to buy, including weapons, ammo, mansions, RVs, vehicles, whatever. So it very much, as a human survivors, have a pay-to-play advantage versus the free-to-play zombies. And so that's kind of the big conflict between the two characters, between the two factions. Full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of this novel for review, but I picked it up on Kindle Unlimited when it came out, so I really enjoyed it. It's a really good story. Personally, I would skip to chapter 3. I wouldn't. Chapters 1 and 2 are basically a lot of hype about how amazing this game is, how in this fictional world, how everybody in the world is playing it, but it's a lot of show and no tell, and it's hard to believe the hype essentially for chapters 1 and 2. And in chapter 3, the author actually shows why it's so amazing and kind of recaps the exact same information. So you don't really need to read chapters 1 and 2, in my opinion. But like I said, your choice. So again, this is essentially a zombie apocalypse game story told from the point of view of the zombies. In this case, Ryan, the main character, who plays one of the player zombies, not the survivors. So the story itself, the story and the game mechanics really reminded me of Left 4 Dead. If you've ever played that series, that particular game story is a group of survivors have to go through a series of missions. It's a first-person shooter game where you kill a bunch of zombies as a group or as a team, and you survive. Zombie survival game. Not that hard of a concept. But in this case, it's the flip of that, in that the main character is playing on the zombie side. So if you can imagine a story where each one of those zombies you kill in that game has its own player playing it, thinking of ways to kill the humans, the survivors, and those zombies getting abilities to upgrade. They get experience as they kill or survive or live. That's essentially what this story is. In this game, each zombie starts out slow moving with low hit points, very easy to kill. Zombies get experience points from killing survivals, which is super hard at early levels, or from simply surviving the hunting parties that go around trying to murder the zombies. As the zombie levels, it gets new abilities. They make it a better killer, and eventually options to upgrade into specialized types of zombies similar to the ones you see in Left 4 Dead. Like you see those big tank zombies, or those spewer zombies, or the super fast runner zombies from Left 4 Dead. Those archetypes are here. And there's a lot more, there's different varieties as well. But they're also detailed with specific abilities and powers. That I thought were a really interesting way to express like the zombie trope in a game way. So I enjoy the game mechanics especially. The zombies have a slight advantage in the dark at night since electricity in the cities is off, but they're also vulnerable during the day because humans can see them better to murder them. Survivors are a real threat to the zombies since they can use real money to pay for guns, ammo, armor, vehicles, body armor, whatever it is. So it's a different dichotomy between rich survivors and free-to-play zombies, but who are weak initially in the early levels. But they also have the mob, in that there are literally hundreds of thousands of them in the world, and if they could find some way to work together, these survivors would have a much harder time murdering them all. So there's a lot of dynamics in here. The main character uses his experience in the beta version of the game and his challenge to think of really unique ways of surviving as a zombie. And as he levels, of course, he gets more powerful and is a bigger threat to the rich survivors. So there is progression of power for the main character here. Also, there's some minor themes of gamer addiction described in the story whenever the main character returns to real life, either from new stories in the world or people like calling in sick to play the game. Even the main character does it at some point. or the main character forgetting to eat and sleep just to play the game more. So there is that reference of gamer addiction as like a living zombie almost. That was, it's there. So there's some meta themes in here. Additionally, there's also the more obvious theme of the rich having all the advantages in life and seeing the rest of us, plebes as tools and fodder for their amusement and advancement. That also exists as this kind of class conflict metaphor thing in the story. There you go. While there's a lot of action, especially in the last quarter of the novel, most of the novel is taken up by the main character's introspective monologuing. I forget if there's a technical writing term for that. But it's basically because the zombies can't speak. They also don't have the ability to like read human languages or understand human languages. And so a lot of the stories is just the main character in his zombie avatar and his zombie, character wandering around the streets trying to survive. But at the same point, the author has to fill those pages with stuff other than a zombie shambles forward. And so there's a lot of self-talk of the main character to himself, speaking about different strategies he may think of to survive, or his opinions on the things that other characters, whether they're zombies or players, are doing, or he is constantly thinking about what he should do, or rage complaining about how the rich survivors have an unfair advantage, or wondering what other factions are doing. If you've ever seen the movie Warm Bodies, where that movie is about a zombie who falls in love, but a lot of the first third of the movie is just him talking to himself, but again, it's in his brain, so it's like voiceover work, and that's kind of the same vibe I get from this particular novel, where there's a lot of just monologuing to yourself because nobody else can understand you, kind of thing happening. So if that bothers you, I don't know if you're going to enjoy this, but it's interspaced with enough action that it's it works for me at least. Okay, I really like the first half of the story. There's a lot of like explanation of game mechanics. It focuses on the main character figuring out how to survive in the new world as a zombie, leveling, getting new abilities, using them in creative, interesting ways. So that's why I like that. I'm a big fan of game mechanics and learning about the behind the scenes of what RPG stuff is there for me to play my own character. And there's definitely an effort for me to do that. So I like the first half a lot about that. Now in the second half of the story, the main character finally chooses a main upgrade path, which I'm not going to spoil what it is because it's a fun twist. And then there's like this weird server shutdown that kind of makes the world go mad a little bit, in that all these players who are apparently addicted to the game so much, they kind of freak out that they can't log in for a few days. When it comes back into the story, the main character's goal shifts. Before it's, I just want to survive till the end of the week. I've never done it before. He apparently only lasted until like day 1 or 2. And so his goal shifts to returning some unique item he picked up from a human survivor that he killed. She's waiting for it in Silicon Valley, and she offers him a ton of money to give it to her, like real life money. And so that changes his goal. He has to go from Los Angeles to Silicon Valley, finding a way to survive along the way, maybe gathering an army, whatever it's going to be. But that's the shift in goals in the second half of the story. So there you go. Overall, good story. Great example of the variety of stories it'll be told in the LitRPG genre. But this is definitely a new kind of story that I thought was really cool. So I enjoyed it. Get the score 7 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to the Luckless, an MMORPG and LitRPG online adventure. Second Age of Retha, Book 1. Long title. Written by A.M. Soma. So there you go. Okay, this is 258 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, I will read to you the author's description. Welcome to Retha, the full submersion video game where you can be the hero of your own adventure. Unfortunately for Kit, it only takes one moment to turn the game into a nightmare. When Chronicles of Retha experiences a software malfunction, Kit, a disenchanted veteran player, is stuck in the game without a way to log off. Even worse, she's trapped as playing as one of the most defective characters possible, an elf dancer that was meant to be a prank. Thankfully, she receives word that there is a way out, but the only escape route is to defeat the game's ultimate villain. Kit, in her joke character, must fight her way through some of the worst Retha has to offer. Her only help is a pretty party of low-level characters, just as powerless as she is, and the occasional act of mercy from one of the best players in the game, the tactum and aloof Soulless Miles. Okay. Full disclosure, I got a early review copy of this novel. I purchased it when it came out. It was on sale, pre-sale, like a pre-order sale for like 99 cents. So why not? There are some things that I liked about the story. But there's a lot more that I didn't enjoy. And most of those things center around game mechanic stuff and then game world stuff that doesn't make sense to my gamer brain. So I'll just list them, you guys. The things that I liked were generally related to the story. The story itself is pretty decent. The characters, I think, were the highlight of the story, and that they're fun and relatable. Kit is put into a bad situation, and even though some of her actions seem inconsistent with the veteran player, she's interesting at least. She has room to grow, to become a leader, and the rest of her new team provide opportunities for game stuff to be explained, and banter for the reader's enjoyment. So there are some really fun, unique character classes in the story. I personally liked two in particular. Echo, which is a hardcore spellcaster class that was the main character's alternate character that she played like 5 years ago on this game before she quit. And then there's the Saboteur, who's one of the noob characters in the story. Or not noobish, I guess. He's like level 20 something when he's introduced. But some of the things he can do is like the thief class set, except that he can also set traps for monsters to run into and get various status effects. So I thought that was kind of a cool character option. Combat overall is decently written. There are some good fight scenes and some inventive ways the characters resolve their situation. So those are all good things that I liked about the story. On the list of things that I didn't like as much. And these are mostly game world related, little pet peeves or things that I thought were inconsistent and weird. First of all, the premise of the story, kind of unbelievable. There are literally so many things that have to go wrong for it to work, like stretches the willingness of the reader's imagination to kind of go along with it. And honestly, by the 10% mark in the story, I was like, this is silly. This is outrageously outlandish. I was kind of annoyed at the 10% mark when this story finally finished setting at their premise. For example, Kit, the main character, she wants to play a space virtuality game. So she goes to an arcade where it's like a full immersion tank. And instead, the game operator forces her, logs her in without her consent into the virtual reality MMO that this is, the fantasy game. And apparently her cousin Bryce works for the game company, and he sets something up in her character profile to incentivize the game operator to log her in there without her consent, and apparently force her into a character he made for her, which is an unplayable character, an elf with the class of dancer and with negative reputation with just about everybody. And apparently it's supposed to be a big joke. He's known as a jokester, but to me, it didn't seem genuine. One, because it seemed hard to do. Two, because even if he's a developer, why does he have access to regular player accounts? And he's not only a jerk if he did it, he's also, risking his job because he essentially had to hack her game account to do all this stuff for a prank. So again, that part alone seemed entirely unrealistic. Now, it gets worse. Instead of just logging out immediately when she finds out that she's in this weird dancer elf character, instead, apparently the author had, while she was logging into like the full immersion tank at the arcade, the operator gives her a sleeping pill, and it's supposed to keep her immersed for at least a couple hours. So that essentially is the author ways of preventing her from logging out immediately, which would be an easy solution to this entire issue. Then, on top of that, the game servers shut down for some unknown reason, and all the characters that aren't kicked out immediately are actually shoved into a backup system that happens to be corrupted, so she can't log out at all. And then her cousin, the jerk, sends her one little note in-game messaging saying that the desk can't shut down the crowded backup server or risk like player brain damage for some reason. Not explained why, but that there's one way to get out, and that there are certain game events that automatically log a character out once they're completed. Again, kind of a weird mechanic, but like I'll go along with that. But she has to beat essentially the hardest boss in the game that no one in the entire history of the game has ever actually beaten besides the devs. And instead of telling her how to beat the boss or like bumping up her character or giving her a bunch of advantages like super powerful levels or whatever so she can do it, he just says, this is all I can do. I'm not going to contact you because my bosses are looking. And that's all the help that he gives her, essentially. And so just that entire setup is just so, it hurt my brain. Like, that's a lot to accept at the beginning of a story. I mean, there's a ton of simpler solutions, like why didn't you just sit still and wait for the developers to fix things, or go kill some mobs? Because of her reputation, she can't go into cities because the guards all kill her on site because she has hate status with everybody, essentially. And so I'm like, why do it? Just go grind if you're bored, go do some other stuff. But no, the main character has to obviously have something to do where she's the hero and she's advancing the plot. It just seems weird to my gamer brain. Like, essentially, in my opinion, I think the author's like trying to use the sort of online premise without having the actual incentive for players to have to go forward and fix something. Because in that series, like some weird Mangenius scientist, game developer, essentially put bombs on people's brains, or the ways of killing them if they log out, or if someone forces them to log out. And so they have to beat the game in order to escape. And so there's an actual incentive there, like life or death, for them to do so. And that just doesn't exist here. So it feels even more watered down here. Okay, that's my complaint about the premise. There's a bunch of other game stuff. For example, the levels don't really seem to matter as much as they are a reflection of relative power between the characters and the mobs. Like in the story, the main character goes from level 5 to 11 without much explanation. Then from level 11 to 20, again, there's some fights, but there's no actual, like, there's no description like, oh, this happened at level 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 20. It's just at some point she's level 20. And, so the levels seem to matter less. Also, the negative reputation thing gets old really quickly in the story. I'm like, why wouldn't all your elf countrymen, everyone else is an elf as an NPC, hate you just because you chose the class of dancer? It doesn't make story sense, and it's not really explained other than the elves believe it's below their dignity. And that's it. Also, some of the game mechanics in the story just seem to exist to help or hinder the main character. There's no thought of balance or realism in those particular game mechanics. For example, the main character has access to her 5-year-old apartment from her alternate character, who is a high-level player. And so there's a bunch of high-level gear in there and mounts for everybody. And so it seems like she doesn't actually earn anything, but instead she has a password she whispers to the door that lets her in. And then she has access to all this high-level gear that she didn't earn in this particular character. And I don't know many game systems that allow that. And that, like I said, small pet peeve. Additionally, the non-changeable crafting skill thing. There's this weird mechanic in that players have to choose or can choose up to 2 crafting skills, but they can't change them ever, ever, ever. And for some reason, the main character chooses to be a sweet maker and also a armor smith. But for some reason, she, even as a high-level character, she never recognized that her class of dancer or mages don't use metal armor, which is the only thing she can craft as an armor smith. So things like that kind of bugged me because I'm like, it doesn't make sense other than to say, oh, isn't that just your rotten luck main character? So there you go. There are some other things, and I'm not going to go through the whole list. I realize it's rather long at this point. Basically, overall, it's not a horrible story. I don't like the end in particular, just because the main character doesn't solve it by her own efforts. Rather, it's an intervention by like a high-level character to save her and her party, and then she gets a magic power that not talked about previously, and that always kind of bugs me as like an end resolution. It's like wave magic wand to solve problem, and so for me, just that and a bunch of other things kind of bring it down from possibly being good to just being slightly better than okay. Like the writing itself, not bad. The story overall, not horrible, but it's just a bunch of little things that stop it from being good, in my opinion. And so it gets a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to the Nagant Wars, The Pawn Sacrifice, a LitRPG novel written by Jaden Hunter. Okay, this is 382 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. Dale Brown accepts an in-game quest with real-world ramifications. Rith Corp's virtual reality MMO Nagant Wars has the potential to alter life outside of the game. He must decide how far to allow his mind to stretch. What should he believe? Whom should he trust? Do reality and fantasy have fewer blurred lines than Dale imagined? Along with his platoon of friends and potential enemies, Dale must fight in both of his worlds. The real question is, can he outsmart his enemy? So there you go. Okay. Some people have issues with this particular series. especially the first book that kind of had a couple revisions that not everybody enjoyed. Personally, I like the series, and I like this book too. The first 2 pages of the novel have a bit of a philosophical tone that is sort of picked up later in the story, but it sets the philosophical tone for the entire novel. But by the 2% mark in the story, though, you're in the game, you're in the Nagant Wars, fighting stuff, main characters beating mobs and monsters, so you get into the game world very quickly in the story, which is very different from book 1, in which there was a long stretch of stuff that happened before you got in the game world. This is an improvement in my opinion, just based on that aspect alone. The story is very combat heavy, especially towards like the first third, 30-40% of the story. And the game mechanics, they're consistent, but they're not super detailed. And so there are things like levels, perks that give you additional powers for the main characters, for your character as you progress, and quests and stuff. But the author also assumes that you've read, I think, book 1, in which he set up all that stuff, like crafting, guilds, possible character progression options. All that's essentially set up in book 1, and I think he assumes that you read it going into book 2, so he doesn't have to explain it again. There are very detailed descriptions of enemies and some items, but that is kind of the extent. It's not super heavy on like a bunch of game information. There's no damage numbers when it comes to like combat. It's just descriptive. I cut his throat. He beat me with the club, whatever it is. Things like that. The teams themselves, because it's an army platoon, they're really well thought out and balanced. There's tanks, DPSs, they're healers, range casters, range fighters, whatever it is. So it's a really balanced group efforts to kill these mobs and quests and things. So game mechanic wise, it's pretty decent. But again, it's not the most descriptive and it's not the most detailed that I've ever read. So it is what it is. Now, one of the things that the author does do very well and seems to highlight and enjoy more is probably the banter and the conversations between characters. There's a ton of humor and joking and friendly ribbing between the platoon members, and each character in the platoon has their own unique personality, their own likes, their own historical backgrounds, cultural traits that they bring to the story. And I like the humorous conversations personally. They're nice breaks from the combat. There are lots of nods to pop culture, movies, and even some LitRPG works. Like there's nods to The Land, Dungeon series, plenty of other stories, like little word drops or stories like, oh, if you've read this series, like, oh, I get that reference kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of cute too. But the place, in my opinion, that the author shines the most is essentially in the speculative exploration of what a system like the Nagant Wars would mean for humanity. When I read these sections of the story, which happens mostly later on in the novel, it almost feels like I'm having a conversation with the author. In that we're discussing, what are the possible future ramifications for developing virtual reality and its impact on humanity, especially, speculatively saying full immersion stuff or the consequence of developing real artificial intelligences. And that to me is fun and interesting, because any novel that can make me think and pause my reading and say, oh, that's a cool thought, and just go on this thought train is cool. And that's one of the things I love about science fiction, is that it does that speculative work of setting a situation and making you think, oh, what if that were real? What would the consequences be? And that's what this novel does, but again, later on in the story. In book 1, this was done with the author talking about how realistic the non-player characters are, and also how real combat was for the players, and that so much of when some players left the game, they had post-traumatic stress disorder, they had PTSD, because of the really realistic, visceral combat with the full sensations of pain and death, even though the characters are respawning. In book 2, that's also there, but in addition to that, there's also speculative exploration comparing the viability of this kind of system. Remember, the Nagant Wars is supposed to be a substitute for a real war, in that societies on Earth or in the larger universe use this system as a proxy for real war. So they would have various agendas or objectives to complete, and whoever won kind of won that particular conflict. And that's what this is supposed to be. And so that the viability of that is discussed in this novel a little bit. In addition to that, it explores what a sentient artificial intelligence would do to become free of its digital confines, and if it's morally right for it to do whatever it can, considering that it doesn't have the same biological based imperatives that we do. It doesn't have pain, it doesn't suffer hunger, or needs procreate or pleasure. And so the things that it would be willing to do are very different from what we would do, because we have internal biological confines. We inherently don't like pain. And so we tend to avoid actions and behaviors that cause that for us or to others, because we can empathize with them. But with an artificial intelligence who doesn't have those things, what are they going to be willing to do? And at the same point, would that artificial intelligence be a better governor of humanity than humanity? Because again, that artificial intelligence doesn't have the same motivations. It doesn't have greed. It doesn't have emotional baggage. It doesn't have an ego to salve. And so it possibly would be better guardian or shepherd for humanity. And so there's that kind of thought conflict in there as well. So again, a lot of cool, interesting stuff. But again, it doesn't happen until it doesn't start to about the 40% of the novel. So that's where things for me start to get really good in the novel. Before that, between like 10 and 40%, a lot of the story felt unnecessary. And I'm not saying it at all unnecessary. There's some stuff with Amy, the assassin, that turns out to be really important. But the stuff with the main character, the platoon, and the combat they go through it feels like side mission stuff. Like they get a main mission to like destroy some ships early on in the story, and that's supposed to be what they're doing. But they don't get back to that until like 60% into the novel. And the combat that they go through are like a bunch of side missions, clearing out a pyramid, whatever. And it doesn't feel important because it doesn't actually end up mattering later on in the story. And it feels like the author put it there just because he needed to fill that first portion of it, or maybe he's responding to commentary about his first novel and that it wasn't action enough, or maybe he's just trying to fill some metric he thinks is there. It's not bad written or anything. It's good action stuff. It's goodish. But again, overall in the story, it just doesn't feel like it's needed or necessary, I guess. And again, small criticism. It doesn't stop me from enjoying the story at all. It's just like when at the end you look back and say, oh, what was the point of that? Other than maybe leveling, getting new gear. So there you go. Overall, had a good time reading the story. There's action, adventure, romance, some seriously interesting betrayals, which I'm not going to spoil, but I was like, oh my God. I was like, that's some psychological stuff there. And a touch of sci-fi speculation. This novel felt a lot cleaner than book one, and it was really focused. So there you go. I think I remember the author saying one of the things he regrets about writing book one is not that he regrets writing. It says that he felt like he was being too clever in book one, and that I don't think that exists here. Like, it's still really interesting, but there's not as many thoughts and like plot themes and like going on at all at the one time. Like there's a couple, and I think that's perfect amount, because you have your combat and then you go into these really cool sci-fi themes towards the end of it. I'm like, oh, that's much more manageable for the average reader, I think, than like some other things that happen in book one. And so like I enjoyed this one. It was really nice. And anytime you can make me think and just kind of dream and imagine in a story, like that's cool. So me, gets a score of 7 out of 10. So there you go. Enjoyed it. Okay, on to Blade Judgment, Everjail, Episode 1, written by Rhino Neethling. I don't know if that's his real name. Either way, it's a cool cover. Okay, it is 36 pages, 99 cents. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, unfortunately. It's a short story. I don't think you can price your novel less than 99 cents on Amazon, so it is what it is. So there you go. I'll read the author's description. The world of Vorslav is full of adventure should you seek it, love should you want it, and death for those who are foolish. Bound by a death sentence in a virtual world with rigid moral laws, Jack is determined to find a way out of his prison, even with the impossible mission ahead of him. With an oath to a stranger he saved, Jack's quest has found him both a place in this world and a target on his back. There you go. Again, it's a short story. You can't expect like a long, monologue or description. Okay. There are a few things in the story that I didn't like, but mostly it kind of won me over. Like at the beginning of the story, I really wasn't having a good time. But like I said, the story won me over, and then by the end I was like, okay, I'll read book 2. This is good. So there you go. The things that I didn't enjoy of the story are essentially some game reference stuff at the beginning. The overall, I'll give you my summary story. This is a short story with intentionally minimal game references. As he said in the story, it is. Jack is sentenced to 365 days in a virtual prison called Vorslav. for not being productive enough at work. I'll get to that in a second. If he can't earn a huge sum of money in the game before his time is up, he'll be executed. Once he logs into Warsath, he gets equipment, he learns the ropes of this fantasy world and of the class, and he kills some bad guys. That's essentially what the story is. There's a lot more details and fun, interesting things that happen in there. Training, coming into a village, buying class stuff, action adventure stuff. It's all there. But that's essentially kind of what it is as a short story. It's, again, only 36 pages. You can't expect too much. Now, like I said, the first 30% of the story I really wasn't in love with. And it just didn't work for me. And part of that is the world that the main character comes from. He comes from an odd future society where that incarcerates people for not being productive at work and like not meeting their work quota. And there's it's a weird justice system that essentially sentences him to a year in prison, in a virtual prison. And if he can't come up with enough money, he'll be executed. And that's a good little port. That's like at least 15% of the novel. It's a cutaway scene and like its own independent chapter. And I guess I'm not supposed to like that feature, but I really don't. And maybe the author is going to set it up as like a potential big villain in the future. So that's why he's setting up as being uncomfortable and being unlikable. But for me, it kind of, at the beginning of the story, I'm like, that kind of taints what I've read so far. You know what I mean? Additionally, the game world itself is described as being intentionally minimalist. There are no status windows, stat screens, character sheets, no numbers. And that's literally written in the novel saying the government doesn't want to pay for like all these things in a game world for prisoners. And for me, all those things are things that I really love. And so just starting off the gate with those descriptions, it kind of gave me an initial negative impression, but the story really does redeem itself. The game mechanics that I found in the story, I took notes. There's an inventory system. There's loot from kills, like loot drops. The body disappears. There's a thing to pick up. There are group playing mechanics where you can split the loot. There are also stealth mechanics. The main character has a stealthy class that's really reminiscent of like the Thief games or Assassin's Creed as far as like stealth and combat goes. And again, these things are just described conversationally in the story. They're not described as, blue screens that show up or text that pops up or a character sheet in which you can mess around with your stats or whatever. That's just not the kind of story this is. Essentially, the author chose or publisher chose to write this as an RPG story that emphasizes the role-playing over the game portion of it. And that's a choice. But again, it has everything that qualifies it minimally as LitRPG. So it definitely hits in the category. The story is good enough. And you do see enough game mechanics in the story that you're like, okay, I guess it's cool. And eventually gets rather decent, rather good. Again, the combat, I think I like the combat the best. And that it really did remind me of like the stuff from Assassin's Creed, and that the main character can't just be a full-on tank warrior and go charging into battle. He has to think about how he fights, how he takes out the guards around an encampment stealthily with his crossbow, or he sneaks up behind them and cuts their throat or kills them stealthily, whatever the case is. And so that kind of redeemed in my opinion. I personally would have loved to have gotten more game details about the game mechanics of the world, but author's choice to write a certain way, and I respect that. I guess that overall I ended up having a good time reading it. But again, it's short. So it gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. There you go. Okay, on to our last one, Vengeance over Vanaheim, a LitRPG Saga, written by Kevin McLaughlin. Okay, this one is 187 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. This is the third book in the Valhalla online series. Okay, I'll read you the author's description. Samantha has faced incredible odds in the past and climbed past the first two realms of Valhalla Online in her quest to reach the final realm, where she can learn the truth about how she came to be in Valhalla in the first place. But now she's alone. Cut off from all support, Sam must struggle to win through this strange new world on her own. With the Black Archer still on her tail, Sam has to move quickly to win through Vanaheim before he can find a way to put an arrow into her and finish her quest for good. Because his arrows do not merely kill, they obliterate all traces of the code for any being they strike, wiping them forever from Valhalla. But Samantha has a plan. If it works, she'll flush out the archer and finish him off, then win through the realm and on to the next. If she fails, she'll cease to exist. Okay, that's the author's description story. This is the shortest of any of the novels in the series so far. It's also the most straightforward. I think one of the criticisms I had for book 2 and book 1 is the copy of the essential story structure. Main character goes into a world. She has someone show that she doesn't know what she's doing. She goes through this intense training cycle by herself. She comes out on the third, like 30-40%, whatever it is, as stronger, more powerful, and she leads her team to victory against a traitor. And so for book 1 and 2, that's essentially the story structure. In book 3, that entirely changes. First of all, she has no help. She has to go into this all alone, and it's a little sad how that happens, unfortunately. But she is essentially going solo from here on in, as far as I can tell. This story is a combination of dragon racing, dragon jousting, and a story of vengeance for the main character. And so those things are essentially the big 3 themes of the story, in addition to like some other cool things. But as far as like the story game stuff in this realm, it's dragon racing, dragon jousting. In book 1, it was castle capture stuff. In book 2, it was raid content. In book 3, racing dragons and jousting. There you go. That's the game stuff. The racing stuff is genuinely cool. Again, the early part of the story is kind of sad, but there's also some cool things in there about AI development. And you actually got to finally get to learn why the main character got trapped in the game in the first place. Like, that is actually explained, and you finally get to learn what the whole thing is about. And so I enjoyed it for at least, if nothing else, than for that actual revelation. Overall, really fun read. You can tell the author said in a Facebook posting that he watched a ton of How to Train Your Dragon animated series and movies in preparation and while he was writing the novel, and you can kind of tell, like, this is probably the most fun of any of the novels that he's written so far in the series. Like, most of them are really serious. Like, I'm the main character, I'm trapped in this game, I didn't want to be here, I have to figure out a way to get out, grr, I have to, level up in power and learn this new thing and kill everybody who opposes me, grr. And in this one, even though there's some sad and serious moments as well, there's also just like the joy of flying a dragon. And it's very much like the main character is like, I get to fly a dragon, whee! And, that was definitely a change in tone that I think was reflective of the author's watching of that children's story, How to Tame Your Dragon. So I enjoyed it. It gets a score of 7 out of 10. And there you go. That's it. We're done. We're finished. Thank you for watching. Remember, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Patreon. And of course, if you enjoy the podcast and want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can do so at LitRPGpodcast.com. And again, thank you very much for listening and for hanging out with me. And until we can do so again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. Ramon Mejia here, just getting everything set up for the podcast thing itself. So, got show notes up, morning stretches, old man stretches. Lion face, lemon face, lion face. Lemon face. La, 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 la. Limberly line the low. I don't know, actually, one of those word twister things. Sorry. Okay. Looks like we're all set up. Good to go. All stretched out for good LitRPG podcastness. Okay. We're going to get going in 3, 2, 1.